The mysterious request. The twin suns of Vorik Prime hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the jagged cliffs and dense forests. The planet was known across the galaxy as the home of the Vorik, a species of ruthless predators feared by all. Their strength was unmatched, their hunting skills legendary. No one dared to challenge them. Yet today, something strange was happening. Captain Sarah Mitchell stood on the edge of the clearing, her team of explorers behind her. They were on a diplomatic mission, sent by the Galactic Council to establish peaceful relations with the Vorik. But nothing in their training had prepared them for what they were seeing now. Before them, the Vorik leader, General Threx, stood tall, his massive, muscular frame covered in dark, armored scales. His yellow eyes, usually filled with menace, now held something unexpected: desperation. "Protect our young," Threx growled, his deep voice trembling slightly. "We beg you." Sarah exchanged stunned glances with her team. The Vorik. Begging? It was unheard of. The Vorik were the apex predators of this world. They took what they wanted. They feared nothing. "General Threx," Sarah began carefully, "you are the strongest species in this sector. Why would you need our help?" Threx's claws dug into the ground as he spoke. "There is a threat, one we cannot fight. It takes our cubs, silently, swiftly. Our strength means nothing against it." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. If the Vorik couldn't handle this threat, what chance did humans have? "What is this threat?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Threx shook his head. "We do not know. It is a shadow in the night. It strikes without warning. We have lost many." The Vorik warriors standing behind Threx shifted uncomfortably. Their fear was clear, even though they tried to hide it. These were creatures who had never known defeat, yet now they were terrified. Sarah took a deep breath. This mission was supposed to be about diplomacy, not danger. But she couldn't ignore the plea in Threx's eyes. "We'll help," she said finally, "but we need more information. Where are your cubs now?" Threx pointed to the dense forest beyond the clearing. "In the nesting grounds. We have guarded them as best we can, but the threat slips past us. Perhaps your kind can see what we cannot." Sarah nodded. She turned to her team, a group of scientists, engineers, and ex-military personnel. They were skilled, but this was unlike anything they had faced before. "Gear up," she ordered. "We're going to the nesting grounds." As they moved through the forest, the air grew colder. The trees twisted into strange shapes, their branches clawing at the sky. The usual sounds of wildlife were missing. It was too quiet. "I don't like this," whispered Jake, the team's engineer. "Feels like we're being watched." Sarah felt it too, a prickling at the back of her neck, a sense of eyes in the darkness. But she pushed the feeling aside. They had a job to do. When they reached the nesting grounds, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The area was littered with signs of struggle: deep claw marks in the trees, scorched earth, and silence. The Vorik cubs, usually noisy and energetic, were huddled together, wide-eyed and trembling. One of the cubs whimpered as Sarah approached. She knelt down slowly, making sure not to appear threatening. The cub stared at her with large, frightened eyes, then, to her surprise, crawled into her lap. "They trust you," Threx said softly from behind. His voice was filled with both relief and sadness. "They sense something in your kind, something different." Sarah gently stroked the cub's scaled head. She could feel its tiny heart racing. Whatever was out there, it had these fearless creatures terrified. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the forest. The cubs cried out, and Sarah's team snapped into action, weapons drawn. "Hold your positions," Sarah commanded. Her eyes scanned the shadows, searching for the source of the noise. From the darkness, a shape emerged, a shadowy figure, moving faster than anything Sarah had ever seen. It darted between the trees, almost invisible against the dark backdrop. "What the hell is that?" Jake whispered, his voice trembling. The figure stopped just at the edge of the light, its glowing eyes locking onto Sarah. It was unlike any creature she had ever seen. Tall, thin, and covered in dark, shifting scales that seemed to blend with the surroundings. For a moment, everything was still. Then, without warning, the creature lunged. Sarah fired her weapon, the bright flash illuminating the night. The creature let out a high-pitched screech and vanished into the trees. Silence returned, but the tension hung heavy in the air. Threx stepped forward, his eyes wide. "You faced it and lived. This is why we need you." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She had no idea what they were up against, but one thing was clear: the Vorak's trust was not misplaced. "We'll protect your young," she promised, her voice firm. "But we'll need to be ready. This is just the beginning." The team nodded, their fear replaced by determination. They were in this now, and they would find out why even the galaxy's deadliest predators begged humans to protect their young. The hidden threat. The forest was still shrouded in uneasy silence long after the shadowy figure disappeared. Captain Sarah Mitchell and her team stood tense, weapons at the ready, as the Vorak cubs huddled close to their alien guardians. The air felt thick, as if the very planet itself was holding its breath. "Did anyone get a clear look at that thing?" Sarah asked, her voice low but steady. "No," Jake muttered, checking his weapon. "But it moved like nothing I've ever seen before. Fast, too fast." Threx approached, his towering form casting a long shadow over the group. His yellow eyes burned with frustration. "This is what we face," he growled. "It hunts without fear, without sound. Even our strongest warriors fall before it." Sarah frowned, her mind racing. "What is it? A creature? A weapon?" Threx shook his head. "We do not know. It leaves no tracks, no scent. It is like a ghost in the darkness." The team exchanged uneasy glances. If the Vorak, the fiercest predators in the galaxy, couldn't identify or stop this thing, what hope did they have? But Sarah wasn't ready to give up. "We need to understand what we're dealing with," she said firmly. "If it's hunting the cubs, it'll come back. We need to be ready." They set up camp near the nesting grounds, surrounding the cubs with motion sensors, cameras, and traps. The Vorak warriors watched silently, their distrust slowly turning into curiosity as they observed the humans' methods. Where the Vorak relied on brute strength, the humans brought technology and strategy. As night fell, the forest grew colder and darker. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, set nerves on edge. The team took shifts, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Hours passed in tense silence. Then, just as Sarah was about to switch shifts, the motion sensors began to blink. "We've got movement," Jake whispered, his voice tight with fear. Sarah signaled for silence, and the team moved into position. The Vorak warriors crouched low, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. From the edge of the clearing, a figure emerged. But this time, it wasn't the shadowy creature they expected. It was something far more unsettling. It looked almost human. Tall and thin, with skin that shimmered like liquid metal, the figure moved with unnatural grace. Its eyes glowed a faint blue, and a strange, rhythmic clicking sound echoed from its throat. "What the hell is that?" whispered Elena, the team's biologist. The figure stopped at the edge of the traps, its head tilting slightly as if studying the humans. Then, with a flick of its wrist, it deactivated the traps with a burst of strange energy. "It knows our tech," Jake hissed. "It's not just some animal." The Vorak growled, but Sarah raised a hand to stop them. "Wait," she whispered. "Let's see what it does." The figure stepped into the clearing, its gaze fixed on the cubs. The young Vorak whimpered, but Sarah stood her ground, placing herself between the creature and the cubs. "You'll have to get through me first," she said quietly. For a moment, the figure paused, as if considering her words. Then it did something no one expected. It spoke. "Leave." The voice was metallic, hollow, but unmistakably intelligent. "They are ours." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to keep her fear in check. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised a hand, and a beam of energy shot towards Sarah. She barely had time to dive out of the way as the ground where she stood exploded. "Fire!" Sarah shouted, and the team unleashed a barrage of gunfire. But the figure moved with impossible speed, dodging bullets and weaving through the trees. The Vorik warriors joined the fight, their roars echoing through the forest. But even their combined strength wasn't enough. The figure was too fast, too powerful. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished into the night, leaving behind only the echo of its hollow voice. "They are ours." Silence fell over the clearing. The team stood panting, their weapons still raised, as the reality of what they faced began to sink in. "This isn't just some predator," Sarah whispered. "It's something else. Something smarter." Threx stepped forward, his face grim. "Now you see why we begged for your help. This is not a fight we can win with strength alone." Sarah nodded, her mind already racing with plans. This was no longer just a mission. It was a battle for survival, and for the future of the Vorik's young. "We'll protect them," she promised. "But we'll need to think like them. This is a war of minds now." The team began to regroup, their fear tempered by determination. They had faced the unknown and survived. But the real fight was only just beginning. The first encounter, the night after the mysterious figure's attack, was long and restless. The team had fortified their camp, setting up additional sensors and traps. But sleep was hard to come by. Every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves set hearts racing. The Vorik cubs clung to the humans, their usual fierce independence replaced by an unsettling fear. Captain Sarah Mitchell sat near the central fire, staring into the flickering flames. Her mind replayed the figure's words over and over. "They are ours." What did it mean? Who, or what, claimed ownership over the Vorik cubs? Jake approached quietly, handing her a steaming cup of synth coffee. "You look like you could use this," he said with a tired smile. Sarah accepted it gratefully. "Thanks, Jake. Any updates on the sensors?" He shook his head. "Nothing so far. Whatever that thing was, it knows how to avoid detection." Sarah sighed. "We can't just sit here and wait for it to strike again. We need to find it first." As dawn approached, the team gathered for a briefing. The Vorik warriors stood nearby, their expressions a mix of curiosity and frustration. They were not used to waiting. They were hunters used to action. But they trusted Sarah now, even if they didn't fully understand human tactics. "We're not dealing with an ordinary predator," Sarah began, her voice steady. "This thing is intelligent. It knew how to disable our traps and avoid our sensors. We need to think like it, anticipate its next move." Alina, the biologist, spoke up. "I've been analyzing the energy signature from last night's attack. It's not natural. It's manufactured. That thing might not even be alive in the traditional sense." "You mean it's a machine?" Jake asked, frowning. "Maybe. Or something in between. Whatever it is, it's dangerous." Sarah nodded. "Then we'll set a new kind of trap, one it won't expect." The plan was simple but risky. They would use themselves as bait. By midday, the team had moved the Vorik cubs to a more secure location, hidden deep within a cave network that the creatures couldn't easily access. Then, Sarah and her team returned to the clearing, acting as if they were still guarding the cubs. The hours dragged by, each second stretching into an eternity. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the familiar chill of Vorik Prime's nights crept in. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then, just as Sarah was beginning to wonder if their plan had failed, the sensors lit up. "It's here," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible over the sudden pounding of hearts. The team held their positions, weapons ready. From the shadows, the figure emerged once more. But this time, it wasn't alone. 3 more figures followed, each identical to the first, tall, thin, and covered in that same shifting metallic skin. Their eyes glowed with an eerie blue light, and the clicking sounds echoed through the clearing. They'd multiplied. Elena hissed, her eyes wide with disbelief. "No," Sarah whispered back. "They've been here all along, watching us." The lead figure stepped forward, its gaze locked on Sarah. "Where are they?" it demanded, its voice colder and more mechanical than before. Sarah didn't flinch. "They're safe. You won't touch them." The figure tilted its head, as if amused. "You cannot protect them. They belong to us." "Why?" Sarah challenged. "What do you want with them?" For the first time, the figure hesitated. Then it spoke, its words sending a chill through everyone present. "They are the key." Before Sarah could ask more, the figures lunged. The clearing erupted into chaos. The humans opened fire, their weapons flashing in the dark, but the figures moved with inhuman speed. Bullets barely grazed them as they darted between trees, closing in fast. Threx and his warriors roared, joining the fight with savage fury. Their claws and teeth met the metallic skin of the figures, but it was like fighting shadows. The creatures moved with unnatural agility, their strikes precise and deadly. Sarah ducked a swipe from one of the figures, rolling to her feet and firing point-blank into its chest. The creature staggered, sparks flying from the wound, but it didn't fall. "They're tougher than they look," Jake shouted, trying to reload as another figure closed in on him. Sarah saw the danger and fired, hitting the figure in the head. This time, the creature collapsed, its body twitching as blue light flickered out from its eyes. "Aim for the head," Sarah shouted. "That's their weak spot." The team adjusted their strategy, focusing their fire on the creatures' heads. Slowly, they began to gain ground, but the cost was high. 2 of the Vorik warriors fell, their bodies torn apart by the creature's ruthless attacks. Just when it seemed the team might win, a new figure emerged from the shadows. This one was larger, more menacing, and its eyes glowed a deep blood red. The fighting stopped as both sides turned to face this new threat. The figure spoke, its voice deeper and more resonant. "You cannot stop us. The future belongs to us. The Vorik young will ensure it." Sarah stared at the figure, her mind racing. This wasn't just about protecting the cubs anymore. This was about stopping something much bigger, something that could threaten the entire galaxy. As the figure raised its hand, preparing to strike, Sarah shouted to her team, "Fall back. This isn't over, but we need to live to fight another day." The team retreated into the forest, the creatures not giving chase. They had made their point. The battle was far from over. And now, Sarah knew, the stakes were higher than anyone had imagined. The human advantage. The team moved swiftly through the dense forest, hearts pounding as the echoes of battle faded behind them. Captain Sarah Mitchell led the group, her mind racing with the implications of what they had just faced. Those creatures weren't just predators. They were part of something far more dangerous, something intelligent and organized. They regrouped in a hidden cave deep within the forest, where the Vorik cubs had been safely stashed. The cubs whimpered softly, sensing the tension in their protectors. The Vorik warriors, though battered and bloodied, stood guard, their fierce eyes scanning the darkness. Jake slumped against the cave wall, wiping sweat from his brow. "We can't keep doing this, Sarah. They're faster, stronger. We can't win like this." Sarah didn't respond immediately. She stared at the flickering light from their makeshift lantern, her mind replaying the battle over and over. Then it hit her. "You're right," she finally said. "We can't win their way. But we don't have to." Elena looked up, frowning. "What do you mean?" Sarah stood, her voice gaining strength. "The Vorik fight with strength and aggression. That's what these things are expecting. But we're human. Our strength isn't in brute force. It's in our ability to adapt, to think differently. We fight smart." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You've got a plan," don't you?" A small smile tugged at Sarah's lips. "I do now." Over the next few hours, the team worked tirelessly, combining human technology with the Vorek's knowledge of the terrain. They set traps, but not the obvious kind. These were designed to play on the creature's strengths, turning their speed and agility against them. Elena modified their weapons, creating energy pulses that would disrupt the creature's metallic skin, slowing them down just enough to make them vulnerable. Jake hacked into the sensors, setting up false signals to confuse and mislead the enemy. Threx watched silently, his fierce eyes filled with a new kind of respect. "You think differently than we do," he rumbled. "You see weakness where we see strength." Sarah nodded. "That's how we survive." When night fell, the team was ready. They returned to the clearing, this time with confidence in their steps. The traps were set, the plan in motion. It didn't take long. The creatures returned, their glowing eyes cutting through the darkness. But this time, they didn't find frightened humans or easy prey. They found a battlefield designed to exploit their every move. As the first creature stepped into the clearing, it triggered a hidden pulse trap. The energy burst hit its metallic skin, causing it to stagger, its movements jerky and uncoordinated. Before it could recover, Sarah and her team opened fire, their shots precise and lethal. More creatures emerged, but each one fell into the carefully laid traps. The forest itself seemed to turn against them. Branches snapped back like whips, hidden pits swallowed their feet, and energy pulses disrupted their speed. For the first time, the creatures hesitated. They weren't used to this kind of resistance. They weren't used to losing. Then the larger figure, the one with the blood-red eyes, stepped into the clearing. It moved slower, more cautiously, its eyes scanning the battlefield. Sarah knew this was the real test. The figure raised its hand, sending out a wave of energy that disabled several of their traps. But Sarah was ready. She signaled Jake, who activated the next phase of their plan. From hidden positions around the clearing, holographic decoys of the team appeared, moving and firing as if they were real. The figure snarled, confused by the sudden multiplication of targets. While the creature focused on the decoys, Sarah and Threx moved in from opposite sides. Threx's brute strength combined with Sarah's precise tactics created a deadly combination. Threx roared, drawing the creature's attention just long enough for Sarah to get a clear shot. She aimed for the head and fired. The creature let out a piercing screech as the shot hit its mark. Its body convulsed, the red glow in its eyes flickering and fading. But it wasn't done yet. With a final, desperate surge of energy, it lunged at Sarah. Threx moved faster. He tackled the creature midair, slamming it into the ground with a force that shook the earth. Together, they finished it off, their combined strength overwhelming the creature's defenses. When the dust settled, the clearing was silent. The remaining creatures, seeing their leader defeated, retreated into the forest, their glowing eyes disappearing into the darkness. Sarah stood, her breath coming in heavy gasps. The battle was over, but the war wasn't won yet. They had proven they could fight back, but now they needed to find out why the creatures wanted the Vorek cubs. Threx approached, his massive hand resting on Sarah's shoulder. "You have shown us a new way to fight," he said, his voice filled with respect. "But the threat is not gone. They will return, and next time, they will be ready." Sarah nodded, her eyes hard with determination. "Then we'll be ready too. But first, we need to find out what they're after and stop it before it's too late." The team regrouped, their spirits lifted by the victory, but tempered by the knowledge that their fight was far from over. The creatures had been pushed back, but their purpose remained a mystery, and Sarah was determined to uncover the truth before the entire galaxy paid the price. The turning point. The forest was eerily quiet after the battle, but the victory felt hollow. Captain Sarah Mitchell knew this was just a temporary win. The creatures would return, and next time, they'd adapt, just like humans had. But what haunted her most wasn't the fight itself. It was the words of the creature with the blood-red eyes. "They are the key. Back in the cave, the Vorak cubs were restless. Their usual playful energy was gone, replaced by nervous glances and soft whimpers. The adults were no better. Even General Threx, as fierce as he was, seemed weighed down by something more than just the loss of his warriors. Sarah gathered her team and Threx around a small holomap projected on the cave wall. "We need to figure out what they meant by the key," she said, pointing to the locations where they'd encountered the creatures. "Why are the Vorak cubs so important to them?" Elena, the team's biologist, had been running scans on the cubs. She looked up, her face pale. "I think I know," she said quietly. Everyone leaned in. The Vorak aren't just physically strong. Their DNA is unique. They have an adaptive genetic structure that allows them to survive in extreme environments. But the cubs, she paused, swallowing hard. The cubs have something different. A genetic mutation. It's subtle, but it's there. Jake frowned. "What kind of mutation?" It's like their DNA is evolving. Faster than it should. If someone could harness that, they could create a species that's nearly indestructible." Silence fell over the group. The implications were terrifying. "So, they're not just after the cubs to destroy them," Sarah realized. "They want to use them." Threx's growl rumbled through the cave. "They will not have our young. We will die before we let that happen." Sarah nodded. "And we'll make sure it doesn't come to that. But we need to act fast." Before they could plan their next move, the ground beneath them shook violently. Dust rained down from the cave ceiling, and the cubs cried out in fear. "What now?" Jake muttered, grabbing his gear. They rushed outside to find the forest glowing with an unnatural light. In the distance, a massive structure hovered above the trees. A ship, unlike anything they'd seen before. It pulsed with energy, and beams of light shot down, scanning the ground. "They're here," Sarah whispered. The creatures weren't just hunting anymore. They were deploying in full force. Sarah knew they couldn't face this head-on. "We need to move the cubs," she said urgently. "But first, we need a distraction." Threx stepped forward, his eyes burning with determination. "We will fight them. Give you time." Sarah shook her head. "No, not like this. You'll be slaughtered." "But," she paused, a dangerous idea forming in her mind. "If we can get inside that ship, maybe we can shut them down from the source." Jake's eyes widened. "Are you serious? That's suicide." "It's the only chance we've got." The plan was risky, but it was all they had. While Threx and his warriors created a diversion on the ground, Sarah, Jake, and Elena would infiltrate the ship. They had no idea what they'd find inside, but they couldn't let the creatures escape with the Vorak cubs. Under the cover of darkness, they made their move. The Vorak warriors launched a fierce attack on the ground, drawing the creatures' attention. Sarah and her team slipped through the chaos, using the distraction to reach the ship. The ship's surface was cold and smooth, almost like liquid metal. They found an entry point, a maintenance hatch, and slipped inside. The interior was even stranger than they had imagined. The walls pulsed with a faint blue light, and the air buzzed with energy. Strange symbols covered the surfaces, shifting and changing as they moved. "This place is alive," Elena whispered, her voice filled with awe and fear. They navigated through the corridors, dodging patrols of the metallic creatures. Every step brought them closer to the ship's core, and the truth behind the creature's purpose. Finally, they reached the central chamber. In the middle of the room was a massive glowing structure, the heart of the ship, but it wasn't just machinery. Suspended within the core was a Vorak cub. Its eyes were closed, but its body pulsed with energy, connected to the ship by glowing tendrils. The creatures were using it to power their technology. "They're turning them into living batteries," Jake whispered, horrified. Sarah's heart pounded. "We need to get that cub out of there. Now." As they approached, alarms blared. The ship reacted, walls shifting and sealing off exits. The creatures had found them. "We don't have much time," Elena shouted, working quickly to disconnect the cub from the core. The creatures burst into the chamber, their eyes glowing with fury. Sarah and Jake held them off, firing at anything that moved. "Got it," Elena cried, cradling the cub in her arms. "Go," Sarah shouted, covering their retreat. They raced through the ship, the creatures hot on their heels. The walls twisted and turned, trying to trap them, but Sarah's determination pushed them forward. Finally, they burst out of the ship, tumbling into the forest below. The ship shuddered, its energy flickering as the connection to the cub was severed. The creatures paused, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. Without the cub's energy, they were weakening. Threx and his warriors seized the opportunity, launching a final devastating attack. The creatures fell one by one, their bodies crumbling into dust. The battle was over, but the cost had been high. Sarah looked at the cub in Elena's arms, its eyes fluttering open. It was safe, for now. But she knew this wasn't the end. They had won the battle, but the war for the future of the Vorik and the galaxy was just beginning. The final battle. The air on Vorik Prime was thick with tension. The forest, once filled with the sounds of nature, now lay in an uneasy silence. The ground was scorched from battles past, and the shadows seemed to whisper of the horrors yet to come. Captain Sarah Mitchell knew they had only delayed the inevitable. The creatures would return, and this time, they would come in force. Back at the Vorik stronghold, Sarah and her team regrouped. The rescued cub rested in a secure chamber, surrounded by protective fields, and guarded by both humans and Vorik warriors. But Sarah's mind was elsewhere, on the ship still hovering above the planet, its dark silhouette a constant reminder of the looming threat. General Threx entered the room, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the floor. "They will strike soon," he rumbled. "We must be ready." Sarah nodded. "This isn't just about protecting the cubs anymore. We need to end this." Jake frowned, glancing at the holomap displaying the enemy ship's position. "How? That thing's practically indestructible." Elena, her eyes still haunted from what they'd seen in the ship's core, spoke softly. "Not indestructible. Vulnerable. We severed their connection to the cubs, and it weakened them. We need to exploit that." Sarah's mind raced. "If we can disrupt their energy source completely, we might have a chance. But we'll need to get inside the ship again. And this time, we finish it." The plan was dangerous, bordering on suicidal, but it was their only shot. The assault begins. As dawn broke over the jagged horizon, the combined forces of humans and Vorik prepared for the final assault. The Vorik warriors, clad in their natural armor, stood shoulder to shoulder with human soldiers armed with advanced technology. It was a strange alliance, brute strength and tactical precision, but one forged in the fires of survival. Sarah led the strike team, her heart pounding in her chest. Threx was by her side, his massive claws ready for battle. Jake and Elena followed closely, their eyes filled with grim determination. The ship's defenses activated the moment they approached. Beams of energy shot from its surface, scorching the ground and tearing through the air. The Vorik charged forward, using their speed and strength to dodge the blasts, while the humans provided cover fire, their weapons cutting through the chaos. Sarah's team reached the ship's hull, finding the maintenance hatch they'd used before. But this time, it was sealed tight. "Jake, get this open," Sarah ordered. Jake worked quickly, hacking into the ship's systems while Elena provided cover. The creatures swarmed around them, their metallic bodies glinting in the harsh light. Threx roared, slashing through their ranks, buying Jake the time he needed. With a hiss, the hatch opened. "Go," Sarah shouted, and they slipped inside. Inside the beast, the ship's interior was even more hostile than before. The walls pulsed with a sickly red light, and the air was thick with the hum of energy. The creatures were everywhere, their movements more aggressive, more desperate. Sarah led the way to the core, where they had found the Vorik cub. But this time, the core was different. It pulsed violently, its energy unstable. They're drawing power from somewhere else, Alina realized. If we can overload it, we can bring this whole thing down, Jake finished. They moved quickly, planting explosive charges around the core while fending off wave after wave of attackers. The creatures fought with a ferocity born of desperation, their metallic claws slicing through armor and flesh alike. Threx was a whirlwind of destruction, his roars echoing through the corridors as he tore through their enemies. But even he couldn't hold them back forever. We need more time, Jake shouted, struggling to set the final charge. Sarah's mind raced. She knew what needed to be done. I'll give it to you, she said, her voice calm. Before anyone could stop her, she charged forward, drawing the creature's attention. They swarmed her, but she fought with everything she had, her determination burning brighter than her fear. Jake and Alina finished setting the charges, their faces pale as they realized what Sarah was doing. We have to go, Jake shouted, dragging Alina towards the exit. Threx hesitated, his eyes locking onto Sarah's for a brief, intense moment. Then he turned and followed the others, knowing she had made her choice. The sacrifice. Sarah fought until she could fight no more. As the creatures closed in, she smiled, knowing she had done what she needed to do. She triggered the detonator. The explosion rocked the ship, tearing through its core and sending shockwaves through the forest. The ship shuddered, its energy flickering and failing. The creatures screamed, their bodies disintegrating as their power source was destroyed. Outside, the Vorik and human forces watched as the ship collapsed in on itself, a massive implosion of light and sound. When the dust settled, nothing remained but a smoldering crater. The aftermath. The battle was over. The creatures were gone. But the cost had been great. Jake, Alina, and Threx stood at the edge of the crater, their hearts heavy with grief. They had won, but they had lost Sarah in the process. Threx placed a massive hand on Jake's shoulder. She was a warrior, he said quietly, and she will be remembered. The Vorik cubs were safe, their future secured. But Sarah's sacrifice had done more than just protect them. It had forged an unbreakable bond between humans and Vorik, a bond born of shared struggle and sacrifice. As the sun rose over Vorik Prime, its light shining on the faces of those who had survived, Jake knew that Sarah's legacy would live on. She had shown them that true strength wasn't in power or technology. It was in the courage to stand and fight, no matter the odds. And in that, she had saved them all. The legacy. The aftermath of the final battle left Vorik Prime scared, but not broken. The smoldering remains of the alien ship were a testament to the fierce struggle that had taken place, and the sacrifices that had been made. The skies, once shadowed by the looming threat of the invaders, were now clear, revealing the twin suns shining brightly over the planet's rugged landscape. Captain Sarah Mitchell's absence was felt deeply among both the humans and the Vorik. Her courage and leadership had not only saved the Vorik cubs, but had also forged an unbreakable bond between two very different species. In the days following the battle, the Vorik and human survivors worked side by side, rebuilding what had been lost and honoring those who had fallen. General Threx stood at the edge of the great clearing where the final battle had begun. His eyes, usually fierce and unyielding, now held a glimmer of sorrow. Beside him stood Jake and Alina, their faces marked with exhaustion and grief, but also with quiet pride. She gave everything. Threx rumbled, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard. For us. For our young. We will not forget. A monument was erected at the site of the battle, a towering structure of stone and metal, combining the craftsmanship of both human technology and Vorik tradition. At its center was a simple inscription, carved in both languages, in honor of Captain Sarah Mitchell, whose courage united worlds. The New Alliance. In the weeks that followed, the Galactic Council sent representatives to Vorik Prime. They had heard of the events that transpired, of the mysterious creatures, the battle for the cubs, and the heroic sacrifice of a human captain. But what truly caught their attention was the unexpected alliance between humans and Vorik. For centuries, the Vorik had been seen as a threat, ferocious predators who trusted no one outside their own kind. But now, they stood side by side with humans, their fierce eyes filled not with suspicion, but with respect. Jake addressed the council during their visit, standing on the very ground where so much had been lost and gained. "We fought together," he said, his voice steady. "We bled together, and we learned that strength isn't just about power or technology. It's about trust, about standing up for those who can't protect themselves. Sarah taught us that, and it's a lesson we'll carry forward." The council, moved by the story and the unity before them, declared a new alliance, one that would ensure peace and cooperation between humans and Vorik. They called it the Mitchell Accord, a lasting tribute to the woman who had made it all possible. A new threat in the shadows. But even as peace settled over Vorik Prime, shadows stirred in the far reaches of the galaxy. Elena, now leading the scientific efforts to study the remnants of the alien technology, discovered something troubling. The energy signatures from the destroyed ship didn't just belong to a single species or faction. They were part of something much larger, a network of connected ships spread across multiple star systems. They weren't alone, she whispered to Jake one evening, as they stood beneath the twin suns. This was just the beginning. Jake nodded grimly. "Then we'll be ready. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The future of the Vorik Cubs. The Vorik Cubs, once the target of a terrifying plot, now symbolized hope. Their unique genetic mutations were no longer seen as a threat, but as a gift. Under the joint protection of humans and Vorik, the Cubs thrived, their future secured by the unity forged in the fires of battle. One cub in particular, the one Sarah had sacrificed everything to save, grew stronger than the others. Threx named her Surak, in honor of the fallen captain. As she grew, it became clear that she carried not just the strength of her Vorik heritage, but also the spirit of the woman who had given her life for the Cubs' future. The legacy lives on. Years passed, but the story of the battle on Vorik Prime was never forgotten. It was told and retold across the galaxy, a tale of courage, sacrifice, and the power of unity. The monument stood as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope could be found in the most unexpected places. And as the stars shone down on the worlds connected by the Mitchell Accord, one thing was certain. Captain Sarah Mitchell's legacy would live on, in the hearts of those she saved, in the bond she forged, and in the future she fought to protect. But the galaxy is vast, and shadows always linger. And somewhere out there, in the cold darkness of space, a new threat was waiting. And when it came, humanity and the Vorik would stand together once more, united, unbreakable, and ready to face whatever the stars had in store.